welcome to another day in Paradox. Today, I'm actually wanting to delve into something that's a little bit more specific to treatment, and that is the idea of negative emotional experience. Um, Anybody that's in therapy likely has some negative emotional experience that they are dealing with or that's going on in their life. Might have led to an addiction, might have been caused by an addiction, might have some relationship roots, might have some trauma history roots. All of these sorts of things um, are obviously why people seek therapy. To some extent, though, um, therapy has become, and I'm actually very much in support of this, a way of people participating in bettering themselves. And I mean, I'll refer to previous episodes in this sort of idea of what is better, what is worse, if we can't put our finger on it scientifically, i.e. our health, our BMI, something like that. People are just looking at having better experiences in life. And one of the things, in my opinion, that is a job of a therapist is to provide tools, and I'm going to borrow this metaphor, in which people can build a life that they want with, right? This is something that I talked about when I talked about truth and the idea of truth being a tool, something like a hammer that could be used to construct and it could be used to destroy. And it's a lot easier to destroy with it. And it takes skill and intent and that sort of thing to construct something with the truth. In this sense, building a better life requires all kinds of possible tools. In the same way that we would want to, build a home, we need all kinds of skill sets and a community of builders, if you will. This goes back to the idea of belonging in community before you self-actualize. You need a community of builders, if you will, that has to do with the relationships and the things that you engage in that are meaningful in your life. One of the most important individual tools that I have come across is something that actually triggered in reading an article about neurobiology and neural pathways, where the argument was made, and again, no doubt, I always make the argument that this is not hard science. These are collections of bits of research and things that I have read and synthesized into practice. But one article that I found very interesting and that I think provided an excellent tool for building the life that you want is an understanding in neurobiology that negative emotional experience comes in large part from unmet expectations. And this goes all the way back to our sort of an evolutionary biological principle. And that is that we are born with certain levels of expectation. Our reflex system and the beginning development of our limbic system in the right hemisphere of our brain, which is where all of our emotions reside, are pre-programmed with some level of expectation. And this is how we have mechanized our survival, because an infant has no idea from a logical perspective or a language perspective what yelling means, right? There's no meaning that comes from that. But the pre-programming of that from a biological perspective understands that yelling is going to get a need met. And as long as there is an infant there, infants are always right. Whatever they say goes. When they yell, we solve their problems. And we will run around trying to find out what the problem is, because they don't know how to tell us that it's a poop diaper versus an empty belly. But we're going to investigate them all and figure out what it is. And as soon as they stop yelling, we know we've solved the problem. That's a pre-programming. That's showing us that we're programmed biologically to engage in action and expectation. how deep that programming goes is something that we can't put our finger on in some specific objective way scientifically, but we can understand based on observing other mammals and other relationships in the mammalian species that we are born expecting that we're going to have participating parents, that we are wanted, right? That we're not quote unquote accidents, that it was intentional for again, biologically, for the species to continue and to propagate. It was intentional that I am here. And we have often seen in practice, particularly psychological practice, some of the most traumatic damage done to individuals is from their parents. And this is certainly not an attack on parents. Most parents do the best they can with what they have. And that's all we can do or all we can expect. But it does point to the fact that we have some programming about how certain people or certain circumstances are going to unfold for us. And that is the definition of an expectation. And so when I come across an article, a modern neurobiological article that's talking about negative emotional experience coming from unmet expectation, imagine my sort of energy as a therapist in seizing that tool. What are we expecting that is creating all of this negative emotional experience? What expectations could we look at and change that might adjust how we actually feel? And this happens all the time in relationships, particularly. This happens all the time in our relationship with ourselves. I've taught at a university for going on 16 years now. How often have students said, I made another D on this essay? And when I ask the question, what did you do differently? They say, well, nothing. I did it just like I did the last one. Why did you expect something other than a D? They held on to an expectation of an A, but they changed nothing about their approach to the problem, even though it had already given them evidence that that approach produced a D. Right? So they doubled down on the way they were doing things and were still really disappointed at the D because their expectation of an A hadn't changed. And so what we are now confronted with, again, going back to the episode about values, is now I have to start making some really difficult choices. Either I change my expectation about my grade, or I change my approach so that I could at least attempt to meet that expectation. Either way, I have to do something different. Or I'm going to be stuck with the negative emotional experience that I had. And that approach is the same way in relationships. And relationship problems are at the top of the list for reasons people come to therapy as well. Why do you expect that person to be any different than they've always been? As long as you're holding that expectation and nothing is changing about the behavior, that significant other or whatever is not willing to come to therapy or something else like that, the longer I keep the expectation that this person is going to change or this is going to be different than what I've been experiencing, the less likely I am to have a positive emotional experience. Finally, this also is one of the best arguments or tools for optimism. Because here's the problem. If we choose to be pessimistic and we choose to be intentionally negative, then what we're saying is, I have an expectation that things are going to go badly for me. Now, what happens there? Well, if things go badly for you, you're right, and your expectation was met, but things are still going badly, and that doesn't feel very good. But if you're wrong, and things don't go badly, you've actually prevented yourself to some extent from having a good experience because of good outcomes, because your expectations weren't met. You expected something bad to happen. It didn't happen. The adjustment of expectations, the intentional changing of behavior to either meet the expectations that you have or to change the expectations that you have in context, might be one of the most powerful tools for individual emotional experience that there is.